Hello. You are listening to the Carroll Connection with your host, Jared Carroll.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Carroll Connection. I'm your host, Jared Carroll, here to bring you guys another great episode. I want to take a chance to shout out last week's episode 98, Julia Albo. She is a senior accountant, works at Fidelity, and we talked about her journey. She grew up in France. She was raised in France until age 13, moved over to the East Coast. We talked about a little bit of the cultural differences that she experienced coming over and the language barrier and learning all those different little slangs that we have in the English language. And it's a really great podcast. You can check it out at thecarrollconnection.simplecast.com. Also available Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all the major listening platforms. So today, bringing another great guest for episode 98, Gio Depina-Alves.
Hey, what's up, guys?
Appreciate you for coming on this podcast. And I was actually a guest on your podcast about a week ago. I mean, you guys will hear this on when this one drops on Monday. But so tell everyone a little bit about who you are and what you're doing currently.
So, as you said earlier, my name's Gio, and I am a musician and podcaster. So, for the longest time, I grew up doing music, and I want to say started since I was like, 5, 6? So I've been doing that almost my entire life, if not my entire life. And as of recently, I've been podcasting and just kind of running the game as much as I can.
Yeah, and we'll dive into each of those as we go out throughout the podcast too. Mm-hmm. Like I mentioned earlier off podcast, I like to talk about family dynamic. Mm-hmm. I think it creates a great picture for everybody to kind of get a little insight into who you are, how you grew up a little bit. Obviously, whatever you're comfortable with sharing.
Of course.
And I'll let you take the floor with that.
Let me see. So I am the traditional black man with no father.
Oh my God.
But yeah, no. So jokes aside, yeah, like my dad wasn't there, so I was kind of just raised with me, my mom, my siblings, and honestly, like I know that a lot of people feel like it affects them and whatnot in a very negative light. I'd like to say, I think I was too young when my dad had disappeared. So like for me, I didn't really notice what I was missing. I had like a pretty regular dynamic from what I understood. So I was pretty fine my entire life. I don't think that ever had bothered me. And I think my mom put me in music when I was 4 or 5 and she had like this pianist come in and teach me some piano, and I started playing that. But I don't think I actually took it seriously until about my 7th or 8th grade year. I think it was around that time I watched some guy play some piano. Can't remember his name now, but I remember he was playing it at our youth group, and it just like the way he played it, like I could feel the emotion in there, and like every time I had played piano before that, it just felt so robotic. It just felt like, oh, I'm just pressing keys and just making sounds. And I think when I actually heard that, it changed everything for me. So like I went from just touching it to like learning how to really play and really show off the emotion, whether it was holding that sustain to really create that like vibratic sound, or like playing very slowly, or just picking up the pace and changing the tempo and finding that way to really give emotion to what I was doing. And I think from there on, I went into high school for music. Like my major ended up being piano. I ended up picking up guitar, bass, and ukulele along the way, and eventually singing as well. But ever since then, I kind of just ran with music. And I think back to like the family dynamic, like my family was always very supportive. There was never that like, don't do that, don't, it was always just like, yeah, chase what you got to chase. You got us if you need to fall back on something, So there was always that. And I think a couple years back, like 3-4 years back, is when I moved to California. I had an opportunity with Universal Music, and then fortunately it didn't stick, but I stayed out there. I did my thing. I enjoyed that lifestyle, and it was pretty fun. And from then on, I think towards like the end of my stay in California is when I really started like getting really heavily into production. and taking that route rather than just the musician who played all around. Like I was telling you earlier, I got to play in like Disney, I got to play in like Nova Scotia, like all this other stuff, like with different events, personal stuff, all that jazz. And I finally just was like, I want to take that creator route. Like I want to be able to produce something. I want to be able to like create the entire environment, not just write for people or play little personal shows for my own music, and not being able to really have that control in the production, just like really play the instruments. So I was like, I want to take that route. And ever since then, I've been doing that. And I think ever since I moved back to Massachusetts is when I actually started doing like podcasting, because I think it was around that time when I started really getting into it, like maybe a year before. And I was just like, I think it started with, honestly, me being it started with this one girl that I was talking to, and she recommended a podcast called Serial. And I think it was the first season of Serial that like really blew up, and it caught my attention so much that like I ended up, because the whole thing on that season was just like somebody being arrested, possibly for a crime they didn't commit. And so the guy who was in prison and is in prison for the rest of his life, like he's got like a couple life sentences, like he's not going anywhere. He hit her up and asked her to do some research and to see if like she could find evidence on him being not guilty. Because he was like, I've been thinking about it for years, and I feel like this is like the one thing that I need help with, especially with me being in here. And like I watched that entire thing, and I think it convinced me so much, I ended up doing my own research. Like it was so yeah. And I think ever since then, like I went like into different podcasts, whether it be Joe Rogan, whether it be Flagrant, whether it be Markiplier's podcast, or even just nerdy ones. Like I'll listen to like my Dragon Ball what ifs and stuff like that. Like so I just
For me it was Joe Rogan really is the one that like
hit it for you.
Yeah, because like I talked about it last week too, because Juliet was with me in Georgia. We used to live in Georgia together, and we were in this like toxic work environment that really kind of pushed me to like find myself in a certain aspect. I lived in Texas and I lived in Georgia for a little bit, and I did it right after college, did it for work. And I lived in Texas for about a year, Fort Worth area, loved it, great experience. And then
for work as well?
Yeah.
Okay.
So then I moved after, it was like a 2-year program, so I worked there. And then my second assignment was to go to Georgia, Augusta. And personally, I hated Augusta. It's the South. It's like the actual South. So like, I just didn't, very polarizing. It was a good experience to see that. I like to jokingly say being in Augusta was like being in Seekonk and not knowing anybody, because it was a very small town. There wasn't really, Atlanta was like an hour and a half away. So like cities wasn't really that close. So a lot of the stuff that I experienced, because in Texas, was a lot of self-reflection, thinking that I should have been happy with a new work experience, a new environment, new friends. Like you think post-college, like I'm kind of living the dream, like I should be happy, and I wasn't. And it started to make me reflect inner, and I started working out more. I started getting a little bit more with kind of putting myself out there a little bit, trying to be a little bit more, expressive with myself. And I started getting to Joe Rogan because it was just a way to pass time at work.
Right.
Like, loved the topics. I love how we could talk to so many different people, have these crazy different conversations with everyone, and have them be educational to an extent and funny. And when I was going through my bad experience, I quit the job, just didn't give 2 weeks. I was like, fuck this, I'm done. I couldn't take it anymore. And then when I looked at my life, I was like, what am I doing that's providing any value? And I couldn't name a thing. Obviously, my work, I'm providing some value being a human being.
Right.
But my purpose, my passion, I didn't have anything. So I looked at Joe Rogan, I was like, I could do something like that. And I started doing the research. I got Blue Yeti microphones. I got a laptop, and I created the Carroll Connection. And obviously, even has a similar thing to the Joe Rogan experience. Like there was a lot of influence there. So podcasts became like a way to kind of express myself, and it's art. It's being creative, and I think you're kind of like discovering this too, because being such a creative person, like it's just a totally different way. And like you were just showing me some stuff with the Roadcaster and my setup, and like, which I appreciate, and having someone at your expertise to like come in and be like, hey, this is what I know about how about the situation. So I was having a lot of static with this bullshit. You guys probably didn't even notice, but like I struggled with this thing for weeks, and like you came in and like shit sounds pretty fucking good right now. It's like loving that. But before we get deep into the podcasting stuff, I want to go back and talk a little bit about your experience as you're getting through, kind of going through high school. You're getting into music, you're getting more into this stuff. Now, everyone's favorite kind of topic is like post high school, the college experience. What was your kind of route? Was college always on the table for you? Like, what were you kind of looking at post high school?
Honestly, when I was gonna go to college, I didn't know what I was gonna do. I actually, because right out of high school, because I ended up finishing high school at a different high school, like a just traditional high school, and I hated it. I just wanted to finish it up and just get out. Because like going from an art school where it's just like, you know, there's all this creativity and everyone's just like super expressive in whatever way they were, you know what I mean? Like whether it was like with their art specifically or themselves, it was just such a different vibe, and it felt so accepting. Whereas like the other one, like, the traditional school, is just so bland. So I think around that time, I actually ended up not being sure what I was going to do for college. I think I moved to Toronto for a little while, just to stay with family and understand business a little bit. Actually, no, I'm lying. So there's a point where I was working with people with disability for a little bit, and I took care of them for maybe 2 years, along with doing like Cutco or something like that. But yeah, I think when I was doing that, it was fine. It was like kind of rewarding in the sense that like you were giving back, and I've always loved helping people, right? Like so that was one thing that always stuck out to me. So when I moved to Toronto for a bit and I was kind of like living out there, I actually ended up deciding when I moved back I was going to go into medical, which is what I did. So I ended up getting my degree, a medical assisting degree, and I was in the process, and I did that for a year, got my degree and everything I needed. Worked in the business for maybe 2 years, almost 3, and around that time I was also working like a lot. Like I just wanted to work. I knew that like I was wasting my time otherwise. Like I think right after I got out of college, I was working as an MA and actually ended up becoming like a manager of a Hep C department when I was there, and also one of the head MAs. So I was training a lot of other students that was coming in, and I was doing all this other stuff. While also I was working at Armani as a side gig. So like I would work from 6 to sometimes 6 at the hospital, and then go to Armani from 6:30 to 9:30, and then get out of there and just go do Lyft, just to like keep me going and like build up funds. And I was like, yeah, as long as I'm like keep moving and keep doing stuff, like who cares, you know? And so I did that for a long time. And then it was a little after that I ended up moving to California. So.
Yeah, let's dive into that experience, because like not a lot of people that I've talked to or just met in like real life, obviously, that will move themselves to a completely new environment. Mm-hmm. It's like people always say change is uncomfortable. People don't like to remove themselves from comfort zones. So talk a little bit about that experience. I mean, you're coming from one coast to another essentially, and you're doing it kind of by yourself in a sense. Obviously, you had friends and stuff you'd meet along the way, but like making that journey, it's kind of all on you. So talk to me a little bit about that.
So oddly enough, when I was at the hospital, there was one moment when because I was going to this like underground like art scene. It was in Quincy. I think now they have like a much bigger studio. And I think when I went there, I met with a couple of new friends, and I met some new friends, and we ended up like connecting, and we kept jamming and all that other stuff. And there was one guy that I connected to. He was like, hey, I know a guy in Universal Music if you ever wanted to take this seriously. And so I was like, this sounds like such a cool opportunity. And I was thinking it over for maybe like a week or two. And I think at that time, I had another friend that also was going to be moving to California, and she was going for a different reason. And to the whole other side. Like I was going to go to LA. She was going to SAC. So I was going like, she was going Northern Cal. I was going Southern. And I remember I was like, what if I do go? And I remember I went to one of the doctors that I worked for and I said, hey, I'm deciding on this. And she goes, well, Gio, do you love music? I said, yeah. She goes, you do realize, like, do you want to do medical? And I was like, well, medical is fine. Like, I enjoy helping people. It's not a bad gig, and it pays nice. And she goes, well, what else did you want to do with medical? I was like, maybe at most become like an NP. She goes, okay, you do realize you can get a degree at any point in your life, right? I said, yeah. She goes, well, then why don't you chase your dream right now and get your degree later if it doesn't work out? I said, you know what? Like that. Maybe I should do that. And so I ended up calling one of my cousins who I knew lived out there. And I was like, hey, do you mind if I like stay with you while I get on my feet in California? Like, would that be an opportunity that I could take? And he goes, absolutely. I've been waiting for you to say that. And so he goes, and honestly, I've been looking for a roommate anyway. So get your ass over here as soon as you can. So I put in my month because the hospital requires a month. And
makes sense though.
Yeah, especially with like where I was at. Because, being a manager of a department, you got to possibly train somebody to take your place, all that stuff. So I did that and I just moved out there. I just packed up, I tried to stay minimalistic, packed up what I felt I needed, especially like my instrument wise. And then I went and decided to also make it like a cross country trip. So like I stopped in every state I stopped in. I think Oklahoma was the worst.
I would agree. I visited Oklahoma a little bit. Not too fond.
No, like I think that was the only state that I crossed through that I was like, I actually feel racism for the first time. Like I was like, oh shit. And the worst part is like, I don't know if they hate me because I'm black or I'm Mexican. Because like, you know what I mean? Like it's just like I'm not one of those things.
Oh my god.
So when I got to California, it really was like a whole new environment, like a whole change, like a whole flip, like everything was different. Like it's where I realized that like, yeah, if you want, like the people that go out there and succeed are because they want it. They have a drive. Like you should not move to like California or like even New York or one of those crazy big cities if you don't have that drive to succeed for whatever you're going for. Like, so especially like in the art scene with LA, like, yeah, there's place to like, even if you're not famous, there's place to actually survive doing what you're doing, right? Like, especially if, say, you go out there and be a comic or you say you go out there and be a musician. Like, you can find these gigs that'll keep you afloat. And, you can live your life in California and while living your dream and making money doing what you love to do, right? But if you don't have that drive to do it, you won't make it out there. Like, and that's something that, like, I had to realize, like, I had to find ways to survive. I had to, like, and the fact that, like, and the other thing too, it's like when you're out there too, you want to find people that are very like-minded. And I think that's what helped keep me afloat, which was like, I had people that was around that was like, they were very business oriented. They had drive. They were like, yeah, let's do this. Let's do this. And so you were constantly finding yourself going here, going there, going there. And like, you were finding ways to like, even though, it's such a big place and there's so like, you don't really know it, like what's going on or what's around. It's like, you start to like, really expand very quickly the more drive you have because it's like you're being shown all this world and you're just going for it and gunning it and like you're getting all these opportunities, you're getting to meet all these things, and like especially in California there's so many free events because of the fact that it's such an not artist like community but like a very like do what you got to do out here. And so it's like I enjoyed that. I think, and then it was a little after that I ended up working on like a weed farm. And
makes sense. I mean, it's California.
Yeah, and that's what helped me pay the bills for a while. But
yeah, I mean, I give you credit for doing that because like a lot of people when faced in those adverse situations where it's like you got to do whatever you do to survive.
Yeah.
And a lot of people aren't willing to put themselves in those situations because of that type of mindset is scary as fuck.
Oh, absolutely.
So like what would your advice be? And this kind of like a layup question for you, for someone that wants to like take that leap of faith to go out to a different state, whether it is New York or whether it's LA or whatever city it could be, to go chase like something that's a little bit bigger than themselves.
One thing that, well, I'll say a couple things. So the first thing is research. Like, know what you're going to be doing, what you have to do to succeed in it, and also where you're going to be. And like, what, like, so for example, like say you're going out to play, like to make a restaurant in California, right? Or you say you're going to make a restaurant in Toronto, right? Know what your demographic is, right? Like, know who you're selling to, what you're doing. Because if you go out there and you don't have a demographic to target, you're not going to make it. You know what I mean? Like, so it is one of those things where it's like, do that research. Also, make sure that you already have some sort of a footing in whatever you're going to do. Don't just go out there with no footing. Like, if you're going to do fucking photography or something, like, oh, wait, can I swear?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh,
You can swear.
Okay. So say you're going to do like some photography work or something like that, and you've held a camera maybe 3 times in your entire life. More times than not, you're not going to fucking make it. Like, you know, it's, make sure you know what you're doing with that camera before you actually move out there to work in it. Because it's like, especially like if you're going into a big city like that, and like it's an area where it's very like competitive, you're going to have competition that is definitely going to be better than you. There's not one place that you can go to where there's not going to be someone that's better than you. So you really have to make sure you know what you're doing. You have that drive. You have like, and you're ready to like improve along the way. Like, but just know that don't go there with no preparation. Is basically all I'm saying.
Yeah, that's good advice, because I think a lot of us, when we see a lot of these influencers on social media, it's like kind of just go after it, go do these things. And like, I get the sentiment behind that. It's like, yeah, go after what you want.
Mm-hmm.
But the underlying stuff they don't tell you in those motivational videos that you see online
is you're going to struggle.
You're going to struggle, and you need a plan.
Yes.
You have to have the research behind it. You need to know what you're getting yourself into. Like when I started the podcast, I didn't know shit about podcasting. Yes, just start, like just do it, as they say, but know what you're getting yourself into. Like there's a lot of stuff that people don't see behind the audio file that you see, or the YouTube video. Like it took a lot to get to this point where I have a backdrop, I have a roadcaster, I have lights, I have a camera. Like it didn't just happen like that for me. Yeah. And for most people, unless you got some type of crazy funds behind you, like that you can invest into yourself, which definitely would advise people, is like create like a little bit of like a savings for yourself to invest into yourself. But if you don't compare yourself to what you see on social media. Don't think you're going to be Joe Rogan tomorrow, or you're going to be Gary Vee the next day. You're like, or if you get into sports, you're going to be Tom Brady. Like, it's just like these dudes put in an incredible amount of time that you didn't see before they came. Exactly. And I think that's what a lot of people misconstrued because of social media, is like, we want this instant gratification. We want this instant success. And like, that was something I definitely struggled with. My own podcast was like, when I first dropped, like I instantly think like, yo, I'm going to get good views. People like me. Like people are friends with me. Like this is going to do well. And like reality is, most of the time, the people closest to you aren't going to support you like that. Like
no,
most of the time it's not something they're interested in. So like you can't expect them to support you in a way that your niche is going to support you in. Yep. And like, that's something I've learned through social media, especially TikTok, where I post like relationship content, as you guys already know. And that niche, a lot of my friends don't like what I post. And like, I had to learn it's fine. Like my content's not for them. My content's for people who are in relationships, or who are struggling with breakups, or who are single and want something to relate to. And once I learned that and accepted there's niches for different things. And like, when you go and find, like you said, know your demographic, that is huge, incredible, awesome advice, because like most people don't know who the fuck they're talking to. Exactly.
I mean, like, for example, the Dragon Ball What Ifs, like that's such a niche thing. But when people know what they're doing and know who they're targeting, it's like, even if it is like the nichest of things, you can succeed. There was actually another example. There was one guy at a music shop that I used to work with, right? Cool guy all around. But there was one point when he started a, what's that thing called? The one where you ask people for money and people donate.
A charity? Is that what you're saying?
Not necessarily a charity, but
A
it's like
GoFundMe?
like a GoFundMe, a Kickstarter. He had a Kickstarter where he was just creating wooden dice boxes for Dungeons and Dragons, right? That started off as like a little like, oh, this will be fun. We'll probably get a couple people here and there, and we can make these little boxes because they had fun doing it. Him and his friends. They had to go buy a warehouse in Texas because they were getting so many orders with so many specific different types of woods that like it became his actual business.
That's crazy.
Yeah, like, and at this point, like I was talking to him not that long ago. Like he goes to different like conventions and stuff like that, like nerd conventions and stuff, just selling his boxes because they keep inviting him because of how much people love that thing. So it's like if you know who you're targeting and you target that thing, even the weirdest, most nichest things can sometimes be hella successful.
It makes sense too. I mean, like once you know the audience, and like another underlying piece of advice is like find what's lacking in that space.
Yes.
Where can you add some value? And like when I was thinking of podcasting, and we'll kind of like slowly start to transition into like kind of podcasting.
Mm-hmm.
That's like one of the hardest things. I think what they talk about is most people who do podcasts fall off after like 10 episodes.
Yep.
And like it's the stereotypical because like a lot of people don't have a formula. They don't know what they're doing, and it's okay early on to not know, but as you get going, it becomes harder and harder to create content when you're just kind of talking out your ass sometimes. So if you don't have the structure behind it, you're going to fail. Like it's going to happen. But in general, when you're doing a podcast, you're going to fail regardless. It's learning how to bounce back because you're going to have bad podcasts. You're going to have guests that don't talk sometimes. You're going to have moments where you same. It's like you're gonna have points where you give opinions that you grow from, and like you don't agree with anymore. And when you learn to accept that and move past that, it becomes kind of freeing in a sense. It's like I can look back to a lot of my podcasts even like a couple years ago, and I might cringe at what I was saying back then, but like at least I can look back and be like, that's where I started from. This is where I'm at today. This is episode 98. Like I never even imagined to even get this far. And like even doing this has created this relationship. Like shout out to Wally and Ever Changing Vibe. This is where our friendship kind of was birthed from. And I went on your podcast because of that. And that was a huge inspiration to get into this, is to meet the different people, to talk about your life. And like a lot of people don't ask what's going on in someone else's life. And that was something that I always struggled with, was like mental health space and talking about feelings and emotions. And it was a space where I always felt good talking to my friends about, but I was like, when I realized, I'm like, everything you do can be content. It depends on how you want to structure it.
Yeah.
So I was like, I could take this conversation, make it a Joe Rogan kind of experience, but make it my own. And I've learned to kind of step into it the more I've done it. So I kind of want to spin it back to you. And like, as you kind of started to look down this podcasting route and you're talking about getting into production and stuff, what was like the main factor? Because obviously when you move back, and I kind of want to look at that experience too, like when you move back, like how was that for you? Because I know when I moved back, it was such a hard transition to come back to like everyone that used to know the old you.
Yes.
And now you're a new version of that. And like I want to know kind of like your experience around that before we get to the podcasting.
Well, I'll be honest, like it was a very big like change for me. Like because California changed my mindset. Like I think I needed that. Like, no, I did not stay, but it definitely changed. Like I've always had a bit of a drive, like, you know what I mean? But living in California made me hold a drive. And so, and I think, because a lot of people always have like an external motivation, right? Like they find this one thing that like, oh, I really want to do that. And then they drop it eventually, which is like that whole 9 to 10 episodes of podcasting, right? And then when you find that internal motivation to just keep going, I think that's when like you keep going. And I realized when I came back that a lot of people around me were very like, they didn't have that motivation. They were comfortable where they were at. They were like, nah, I don't mind leaving this small city. I want to stay in this small city, you know, like, and I was just like, but I don't want to be here forever. Like, this is a temporary thing. Like, you know, like, come on, let's go. And when I had the people around me just not have that same drive, it was very like painful. You know what I mean? Like, it was just like, no, I want to take my friends with me. I want you guys to come on and like, let's go. And when I couldn't get that same reaction, that same drive, like it was just like, damn, okay, well then fuck it. I'm on my own then, you know? So, and I've dropped friends. I've moved forward from certain people. And I think one of the other struggles too was like I had my own space for so long. Like, I made my friends out there and we enjoyed each other's company. Like we still talk to this day, but it was different to come back home. And like, even when I first came back, staying with my parents for a bit and just having that like, shit, this is weird. You know what I mean? Like I don't have that like time for myself. I don't have that time for me and my dog to just chill and whatnot and do our own thing. Like I have to worry about other people's time. And that was a weird thing for me again. And then also just like the connections, oddly enough, which I guess is another bit of advice. It's like, cause I made so many connections in terms of like doing like my artistic endeavors and whatnot out in California. I didn't have that back here anymore. So it was just like finding that connection to kind of really get myself going again. And like creating those new ones was so much harder coming back. And it was weird because it was like going to California, even though I knew nobody, the connecting was easier. Then coming back to some people that I already knew, it was like, how come I can't make those same connections so quickly? And it's just like so many people I've known has like kind of given up and they don't want to make those connections, and it's so weird. So
I think a lot of it too with why it's so easy is because like they don't have this perception of you already. A lot of the people that you're friends with from our hometown and in these areas, they've grown up with you. They have this perception of you. This is how they see you.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people will try to put you in boxes.
Yep.
And when you've moved on and you're able to grow, excuse me, and you're able to grow and then come back to those same places, people want to put you back in the same boxes which they had you in.
Yep.
And I had to end a lot of friendships that way because like I wasn't the same person anymore. And like they kept holding me to the standard of who I was. And I was like, I can't live to that standard because that's not me anymore.
Yeah. And the same thing happened with me too. It was like, I think everyone, and granted, am I still a jokester? Absolutely. Am I still like this quirky dude that's kind of nerdy? Abso-fucking-lutely. But it's just, I think people expected me to be that like very like, oh, I'm going to be in your face energetic all the time and be kind of funny and quirky constantly. And I'm just like, nah, I have, I've learned to outgrow that. Like I realize I don't need to entertain people constantly. Like I've learned that like I can just enjoy my life and do whatever I want to do and not feel like I am kind of beholden to you. Like I have to entertain you consistently. So that was one thing that like I had to like let people know like I'm not like that anymore. So
yeah, and like even like I got tattoos and everything now. Like I learned to not live in this expectation of others. Like and a lot of it too is being afraid of what my parents would think. And like, I think there is value in that as being like when looking from the parent side to like put an expectation down on your kids to a certain extent so they don't get in trouble with the law and they don't do stupid shit. Like
right.
There's value in that. But I think the huge part about being young is it going out away from your parents and experiencing different people in a different environment. So you could figure out who you are. And like, I think part of the journey in life is getting back to who you were as a kid. Because we lose that. We get dumbed down because of like social programming, social media, schooling, different people that we come in contact with. Like we lose a lot of that charisma and a lot of that creativity that we were when we were children, when the world was kind of our oyster. We kind of get dumbed down by society. And
I think in a sense too, you're also protecting yourself too, right? Like that childhood thing, like you want to hold on to that, like, and you don't really like want to show that off to the world. So
there's a lot of trauma too that we get that's when we're younger too, that I think that causes a lot of these behaviors to let go of like that creative aspect of ourselves. And like being someone in the art space, you've kind of learned to always kind of be able to like embrace that side. So I mean, I'm kind of envious of you in that aspect that you've had outlets for yourself to kind of express yourself, because before this podcast I never had that. And like that was a huge problem with me, because like football for a long time was like my outlet. So like when I lost that after high school, I graduated and I moved on from sports. That's when I started to do drugs and drinking and getting down this bad path. And I'm grateful for these experiences because it led me to this, where I could provide value. I can have meaningful conversations and create meaningful connections. And I think that is forever valuable because like I say all the time on the podcast, every single person that comes on here has a different story, and they have something valuable that they can provide not only to me, but the audience that listens to the podcast. Right. And it takes a brave person to get behind a microphone, behind a camera, and say, this is who I am, this is who I've been through. Well, this is what I've been through. Yeah. So, like, I give you a lot of credit for coming on, for doing this type of podcast, because this type of podcast, I like to think, is a little bit different than something that's more comedic or, I don't know, a little bit more easygoing. Like, talking about yourself is uncomfortable a lot of the time. So you being able to do that is something that I applaud. And I want to dive into podcasting now, is like, kind of what was the motivation as you come home, and like, obviously music has been such a huge inspiration that to take a kind of a turn from that and to step into hosting podcasts. Like, what was kind of the motivation there?
Well, I still do the music.
Yeah, obviously.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Like,
I don't think that'll ever go away.
Yeah, no. I actually just recently opened up my Fiverr. So that's always up for anybody. A little
what's
self
that?
promo. Fiverr?
Yeah, I don't know what that is.
So it's basically a site for freelancers. So whether, you're a creator, an artist, or say you need a ghostwriter, or you need somebody to do that, like, basically anything that can be done virtually. Like, I think even for my family's driving school, because we own a driving school, I ended up, they needed an Excel sheet to monitor like students and all that other stuff. I ended up paying some guy to create an Excel sheet, like a pretty Excel sheet that had like some really good automations and stuff just built in. So that way, like, say if they needed to count up money, it calculated it. Say they needed it to know if they paid or not, like things would turn green or red, like, so those formulas were already built in, like in like $10 I paid. And yeah, it's just a place for people to do that. So for me on Fiverr, I will make like music for people, whether it be like for their intros or for commercial use, their social media, stuff like that. Or even if they just wanted a beat, like, I'll make that for them.
Yeah, shamelessly plugged too. Like,
oh, of course.
Like, totally fine with that. I mean, that's part of I'm giving the platform for people to do that. So like, I would definitely want people to know, hit you up for that for sure.
Yep. So just look it up, Gio D producer, DEE, not Perfect. Just the letter. But yeah, so there's that. But when it came to podcasting, I think I really got into that whole scene, like I was telling you earlier, just listening in for like a year. So like I'd be trimming some of the plants and stuff like that, and I just have podcasts in the ear, whether it be like a podcast about someone like murderers and crime situations, or whether it got into the nerdy stuff, like where I could kind of create new scenarios of shows that I'd already watched. It was just, and for me, I love like having that. Like I think I was talking to you a bit off air, where I'll sometimes sit in my car and like listen to orchestral music to create stories in my head. And I think when I was in California, there was one person I was like talking to, and we actually almost started a podcast ourselves. We didn't have any of the equipment yet, but we almost started a podcast ourselves of us doing almost, in a sense, like a D&D storyline, where we'd create these storylines and we allowed the viewer to pick the next part of the story. It didn't end up coming to be, but like there was that whole aspect already in my mindset. And then when I moved back to Mass and I went to go visit some friends, it's when I met Molly and Tom. So I was talking to them too, and both of them were like, come on our podcast. And so I think the first one I went to was Wally's, and the second one I went to was Tom's. But when I went to Wally's, we did our thing. We had our episode. And then after that, he sat down with me. He was like, would you ever want to do a podcast yourself? And I said, actually, kind of. I've thought about it already. Oh, and the other thing too was, Clubhouse?
Yeah.
So, one of the guys I actually had on as a guest on my podcast, Asha Waterhouse. We used to be on Clubhouse, and we would talk about we would bring on guests and stuff like that onto our Clubhouse, and we'd allow them to speak speak, but it's really them showing off their music, whether it was already pre-recorded or they were doing it live, and then we would tell them how we felt about the thing. So we'd be like, oh yeah, that was good in this sense, and this sense, and then, or we'd be like, hey, I think you could fix this, and this, and it was really cool. And so I'd already had thought, like, if I was going to do a podcast, it'd be something like that, or if I was going to do like a live view thing, like say if I was going to stream something, I would do something like that, right? And just rate people's music live on air with a guest, and then eventually Mic 'em Up kind of came to be. And it was like a cool concept in my head. And I was like, oh, okay. And I remember Wally was just like, just get the equipment and do it. And I remember I was like, no, I don't want to do that. I was like, if I'm going to do podcasting, I'm going to do it the way I enjoy it. And so like, that's when I was like, I want to invest in the camera work. I want to paint the walls and set up a whole room where I create like an environment. And because I know that that's like a big thing for me. Even when I record music, I want to create an environment. So I was like, I went out and I did some research. I found some furnituring. I did as much as I could to start. And I was like, okay, I have basically the base of what I will need to start. After that, I can grow and improve over time. And that's how it ended up coming to be. So after I did the flooring and all that other jazz, I think the only thing I have to do now is I'm gonna actually add like some soundproof insulation inside the walls and actually build a music studio right beside, which I might also podcast in and create as a second environment to record in. But yeah, that's just kind of like how I like to be. It's like I like to, ever since I came back from California, it's not just a go and just gun it and just see what happens. It's more of like, let me see what I can do, how I can start off the best way before I really like step my foot into it. It's that research that I'll do, that preparation that I'll do before I like get into something.
Yeah, no, I think that's really good. It's more methodical.
Yeah.
And I think that is a great way to approach things. And excuse me, congested as fuck because of allergies. Sorry, guys. I sound definitely a little bit differently. But when I started doing the podcast, like I literally, like if you go on my personal Instagram, Jared M. Carroll, a couple posts ago when I first got this backdrop and the new microphones, I made like a 2-year post. And if you scroll all the way, I did like a couple of different pictures of like the setups. And I had like a dinner tray, like this dinner tray in my bedroom. I had my Blue Yeti microphone stacked on top of the box, my laptop right next to it. And that's how I started doing the podcast. And because I recorded the intro over there. And my intro is still trash. It's like fucking me a couple years ago on a fucking shitty microphone talking about what this podcast is going to be. Completely, somewhat to that intro. I've stayed the same, but obviously as you do it over and over, you change and you grow, and that's what you really want. Yeah. But it was to illustrate that there was thought behind just doing it, but also just starting at the same time. Because I think there's a balance between methodical approaching it and then just getting yourself out there. Because some people get stuck in the whole, I'm going to plan, and then never execute. And that's a huge issue with a lot of people, is getting out of the starting block. So kind of talk a little bit about like what Mic 'em Up is, because I want to give you a little shameless plug so you can allow you to kind of talk about to Mic 'em Up and like kind of like what the thought process was to creating the show.
So when I was kind of coming up with the idea of Mic 'em Up, it was like I kind of wanted to do like what we were doing on Clubhouse, and I think my initial co-host idea was going to be Asha, but that dude he's gunning it. Like, you know, his whole job is the video editing and recording. Like, he's constantly going all over the States, just doing video work for different companies. He's making well over, 6 figures. So I was like, all right, I'm not going to take his time because he's probably never going to be here.
Yeah.
But I was trying to figure out what's the best way to kind of get close to that. And I thought, okay, I can also still interview artists. I can still talk to them on like why they do what they do. And then at first it started off as like, I just am going to interview musicians and talk to musicians and see how that goes. And I want to say maybe within episode 2 or 3, I realized Mic 'em Up doesn't necessarily sound like it's specifically just music. I can essentially interview any artist, like whether it be a dancer, whether it be an influencer, whether it be a creator of some sort. Like, so that's when I realized this could be a whole thing on art. Like, I can kind of, in a sense, connect the art community in a way where it's like, if, like, for example, and it does help because it's like I do get those connections still. So like I remember with Asha, I I was speaking to him one day about like how one of the other guests that I had cut, where it's just every single time that she's doing her editing, her files go missing. And he was like, oh, okay. And he sat down and he created an entire tutorial for me to send to her. You know what I mean? And it's just like that kind of connection was really cool because it's like, you know, he's a video editor. She's a social media influencer. It's like I can create all these connections from meeting all these people. And I can also, I'm also trying to create like an environment where people who say are looking into creating those things may see those people and be like, ooh, I like that. But at the same time, and like can learn a little bit from them or how they started or, you know, and then the other thing too is like, I am a very laid back person. Like I love to like just chat and talk. And so when I bring on guests, and I think usually what I'll do is I'll let them know like, yeah, this is interview based. I'm going to ask you questions about like your art and everything like that. But I want you to know you can talk about whatever you want. Like I want you to know like enjoy your time here, have some fun. If you want to talk about a certain thing, that's on you. Like right? Like so like cuz essentially you're still showing off like who you are by what you want to talk about. So feel free to talk about whatever you want as well. Don't feel like you have to wait for me to speak. And I think it kind of creates this environment where we all kind of have fun and can joke around and like, you know, and it's not necessarily like they feel so like, and I've noticed it as the interviews have gone on. Like there's some people that'll get on there and they'll start off and you'll hear that shaky voice of them being
Yeah,
nervous,
I know. Yep.
you know, and like as soon as they realize we're just chatting, and it's not necessarily like they feel like they're being interviewed the entire time. You see them open up and you see the fun like kind of coming out. And that's a lot of the places where I get my funny edits, you know. Like,
He makes some great edits, guys. You gotta check it out.
yeah, so it gets pretty fun when I do stuff like that. So and when your episode comes out, you know, that'll be there too. Like
I'll be sharing that. You guys gonna have to check that out. We get into some good stuff. It was a great conversation.
Yeah, I think so too.
I think because like a lot of the stuff where, because I definitely started off in that same place where when I was doing the podcast, I was like, I'm gonna interview people who have businesses, who have certain things about them, and then I was like, nah, fuck that. I'm gonna talk to whoever I want to talk to.
Yeah.
And like, because I was like, it got back to like everyone has a story, and like we all go through something, and I was like, I can always make it relate to mental health, and like, because me, mental health was everything. Like my family has struggled with it. My youngest brother is autistic, so like it was something I was always aware of growing up. And to bring that conversation to the forefront and make it something that I want to be like a face of, especially with men's mental health, because I openly talk about therapy on the podcast and how that's helped me, and it's been a huge, crucial aspect in me, like dissecting my own emotions and feelings and figuring out how to cope with these in the best way. Because a lot of time as men, we're not taught properly, and It's not anything towards our parents. It's just something that's systemic through society that you have to be so stoic. You cannot show any emotion whatsoever. If you do, you're labeled as the angry man. And like, there's ways to express yourself without resorting to anger or resorting to like being so stuck where you don't express anything. Because when you store these things so much, you can only do it so much. You're going to break at some point, and you don't want to get to that breaking point because everyone's breaking point can lead to very dangerous things. So I try to bring it to the forefront. Hey, if you haven't checked out therapy, maybe you should. It's interesting because, like, I say it all the time. Everyone can use a therapist.
Absolutely.
Just to get an unbiased opinion from someone that's going to listen to you and give you professional, legit ass advice. Like, it's nice when I used to hear from my therapist, if like I was saying some wild shit, she'd be like, yeah, you're kind of wilding out right now. Like, and like, but a lot of time too, she would validate a lot of stuff. It's like, it's okay to feel these things. And then she'd give me ways to cope with these and express them in a way that isn't gonna hurt someone else or hurt myself. And that's a huge thing, is a lot of people will take the pain that they feel and put it on themselves. And that's not good. So like creating a platform for people to come on and just talk life, experiences, what we're going through, passion. That's been a huge talking point for me, because everyone lights up differently when they talk about something that they actually enjoy. Like when I hear you talk about music, or it's more specifically music, I can tell you light up a little bit differently about music. But like same thing with podcasting for me. Like when I talk about it, like I can get animated about it, because it's like, it's something that like I really enjoy doing. And like, it's not something that I knew right away. You go through life, you experience these things, and all these different conversations that I have with so many different people. I can go back at these at any point And I always reference my second episode. I think I talked a little bit about on Mic 'em Up, or Off the Mic is like your kind of spinoff for Mic 'em Up. About my grandfather in that episode and the value that had once he passed away, that I have a conversation that goes through time, and it's him sharing his story. And like in a time with technology being so prevalent.
And that's right. You
That's
got that
valuable.
on your arm as well. Correct?
Yeah, I got the quote, take a chance, got a signature, because like that was like kind of his advice, the stamp on that episode. And like that's something I could take with me forever. And I think there's a lot of value in just podcasting. It's storytelling, essentially.
Yeah.
What's kind of some of the stuff that you've learned early on in doing podcasting? Because whether it's the bad stuff or the good stuff, because like I've definitely had some pretty bad podcasts, and like you learn, whether it's learning about how to be a better communicator, a better listener. Like, what are some of the things that you've learned?
A lot.
Facts, though.
So, number one is learning yourself, right? So one of the things that I noticed when I started podcasting is my repetition of certain words, whether it be like, or whether it be one of the big ones for me was in that tone. Just little things like that where it's just, you can take those out. Or even for me. It's just learning how to remove those and kind of find different replacement words, stuff like that. What was another one? Learning how to control the guests and what you can and can't do with your guests, depending on the person. For example, the first episode I ever went to go record, aside from just technical issues, which is a whole other thing.
Facts.
A whole other beast. Because I think I tried to just stream everything through my laptop, and I had like all 3 DSLRs going through there, and I had my camera person just clicking the buttons on there. But my laptop could not handle 3 cameras, and eventually that entire footage ended up essentially getting lost, which I was thankful for because that guest was trashed. And that's when I realized, like, okay, I need to control how much alcohol consumption goes on in the studio before something gets messed up in my studio. Because he tripped over my cameras maybe 3 times eventually. It was not a good episode. It was just constant redundancy. He kept cutting us off. It was just learning to control the environment was a big thing for me in the beginning. And then I think the technical issues kind of came after that. And just learning the equipment, learning what I can and can't do, learning how to improve, learning where I was messing up. And in a sense, even though there's no real structure behind my show, learning a structure, understanding how to build that and how to speak to people and how to make people comfortable, because that was another thing. I had one guest, and unfortunately I lost his episode, but he's going to be coming back at some point the next time he comes to Mass, because he lives in LA. Unfortunately, with his episode, he was so nervous and so prepped for me and that's when I started telling people, like, hey, this is just a conversation. Don't feel like you have to wait for me. Because with him, he sat there and waited for each question each time. And it was usually like one-worded things. It's like I asked these questions that I felt he could elaborate on, and he's just like, yeah, it was for this. It's like, okay. Like I went through most of the questions that I had prepped, in like both in my head and on paper, before the first 20 minutes had finished.
Gee.
Yeah, so I was like, okay.
That'd be the worst. Though, I've learned how to fill dead air too. Like that's something as a podcast host that I've had to like learn is like some episodes I'm gonna have to talk more. Like I had to learn how to articulate myself.
Ooh, that was another one too.
To carry the conversation to get us to to point A. Because I laid down like a structure, and like I said to you, like this is the talking points that we're gonna try to hit. If we don't hit them, we don't hit them. And a conversation's fluid. It's going to go and it's going to come back. And like, I had to learn how to bring the conversation back to my talking points. I had to learn how to get, like the first 30, 40 minutes, we spent like 2 hours before we even recorded.
Yeah.
But like, I try to spend time beforehand getting the guests comfortable in the environment that we're in. And a lot of the time I'll talk about personal stuff going in my life because I like to believe in the theory of kind of give a little to get a little. So like I'll give a little bit of my stuff, be like, hey, this is a safe space. We can talk about whatever here. And I'll do it off air. So then we lead into it. Usually 10, 15 minutes. They're usually a little nervous anyways. So like I already know that going in. And then by the end, I'm like, it's going to fly by. Just trust me. So then you get the people talking, you get them rolling, get the juices going. About halfway through, they're super animated because you're starting to talk about passion, and by the end of it, like it's over. Like yeah, and like for us, we're pretty much about to wrap up soon. So it's just
Yeah.
like it goes by so fast, and like you learn these things as you go. You learn to be a better communicator, a better listener, like a better podcast host in general, and it's just stuff that can relate and you could translate into real life. And I've had a lot better relationships with people. I'm a better listener, and like hearing people and not trying to just hear them to speak, but hear them to understand. Been a huge thing for me, and podcasting has been a huge part of that. As we're starting to wrap up, is there anything that you want to say? Obviously, I told you the question that I'm going to ask prior to the podcast. Besides that talking point, is there anything that you wanted to say or bring up before we start getting to that?
You know what? I'll target like a quick little mental health thing.
Yeah,
'Cause
go
it's
ahead.
Like one thing I don't really bring up anymore because I don't like to use it almost like as an excuse. It's because like I found it kind of almost like as a gift at this point. Is learning to control the ADD, and you can. It's like although it does seem like you can't, like just finding how your ADD works and how where those points are. Like for me, I learned that scheduling in certain ways actually helps me figure things out better. So if that is one of your issues and you have problems with like being dismissive or forgetting what you're going to do or just like starting it in your head and then getting lost in it, and then just never actually starting it, find ways to kind of cope with that and you'll kind of get there.
Oh, that's perfect. I'm glad that you hit that too, because I know a lot of people do struggle with ADHD or ADD and things like that, and like being concentrated in a lot of aspects. So I think that was a perfect point and a perfect podcast to talk about that. So, Gio, my last question for you is, what would your advice be to someone who wants to pursue their passion?
My advice, I guess it would go back to what I was talking about earlier. Prep, like do your research, understand what you're going to be doing, like way before you even start. Don't do so much prep where it's just prep work, right? Like don't get lost in it, like we were talking about earlier, but understand what you need to get started, and then start kind of dipping your toes in and start walking through. Because if you do not do any prep and you just kind of go for it, like you're going to get, you're going to hurt yourself a little bit. Even if you do make it there along the way, there's that. And then the only other thing I would say is making connections is also very important. Like half of the people that are famous will let you know, like they probably wouldn't be where they were at unless they had certain connections, unless they were at a certain place at a certain time. Like, so make those connections so that way you can slowly build yourself to wherever you need to go. And if you find the right connections and you build along the way, and obviously don't make the, negative connections, find people that are actually going to help you build. And if you can help them build as well. But find those people too, to help you kind of get to where you need to go.
That was perfect, man. I really love that advice, especially tying it to the podcast name. I mean, that's definitely huge. I mean, it's part of the reason I do this is creating those great relationships with fantastic people like yourself.
Well, thank you, man.
Appreciate you for coming on the podcast. Appreciate you for expressing a lot of the stuff that you've gone through in your life, talking about podcasting with me. It's been a fucking blast, brother.
Well, thank you, man. And it's been the same for you. I can't wait to air your episode.
And I'll
Like,
be posting that everywhere. Shameless plug, mic 'em up, off the mic. Anything else you want to plug before I start giving my stuff?
Just one more. Fiverr, Gio Depina-Alves.
Check him out, guys. And I'll tag him in a lot of my stuff. So if you guys want to get in contact with him, and if anyone that has been a guest on my podcast or listens, wants to be a guest on Mic 'em Up or Off the Mic, I can make that connection for you guys. So if you guys like the podcast, please rate, review, subscribe. You can share it with your friends, your family, your grandma. You can check it out at thecarrollconnection.simplecast.com. Also available Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all the major listening platforms. So until next time, guys, peace.